There are many reasons workers may sue their employers. These reasons include wrongful termination, discrimination, retaliation, and unpaid wages. Watch the rest of the videos on my channel to learn more about these illegal employment practices. But in this video, I'm going to give you my top 5 specific reasons to sue your employer with specific examples. If any of these scenarios sounds like something you may have experienced, talk to an employment lawyer immediately. If you're in Seattle, Washington, feel free to reach out to my firm. The link to my website is in the description of this video. Okay, let's begin. Number 5 is unpaid wages. These claims are called wage claims, and they come up in a variety of different ways. But the general rule is that employers have to pay you for the work you perform. So if they aren't paying you what they owe you, you might have a wage claim. Here are some examples. Say you are a non-exempt employee, meaning you should be getting paid overtime if you work more than 40 hours in a week. But your employer doesn't pay your overtime rate even though you worked more than 40 hours in a week. Well, in that case, you would probably have an overtime claim to collect those unpaid wages. Another example is unpaid commissions. Say you work for commissions, but your employer is refusing to pay you your commissions. Well, you might have a wage claim to collect those unpaid commissions. Another example is failure to provide meal or rest breaks. Now, the laws around meal and rest breaks will vary from state to state, but many states require employers to provide non-exempt workers with meal and rest breaks. And if they do not provide these breaks, the worker can sue to collect the wages for the time they would have been on break. Now, wage laws have a bunch of exceptions. Not all workers get overtime and breaks. So if you think your employer owes you wages, talk to a lawyer and watch my video on overtime to learn more about that. Number 4 is getting fired for disclosing your disability. These claims are called disability discrimination claims, and the general rule is that your employer can't fire you just because you have a disability, as long as you can still perform the essential functions of your job. And we see this happen a lot because when you disclose a disability to your employer, the employer might think, oh shoot, they're not going to be able to do as much work as they used to be able to do now that they have this disability, so I better get rid of them. So, say for example that you work at a company for a while and you perform a job well. Then you get diagnosed with some serious medical condition or injury. You tell your employer about your diagnosis, and all of a sudden your employer writes you up and terminates you for some made-up reason. Well, that's probably a case of disability discrimination, and you should talk to an employment lawyer. And watch my video on disability discrimination. I'll put a link to that video in the description and in the card. Number 3 on my list is getting fired for reporting your employer's illegal activity. These types of claims have different names. Sometimes they're called whistleblower claims, sometimes wrongful termination claims, and other times retaliation claims. But the general rule is that workers have a right to report their employer's illegal activity. So if you report it and then you get fired for reporting it, that's usually a violation of law. Now, these claims can come up in so many different ways that I can't cover them all here, but I'll go over a few. Say, for instance, you report one of those wage violations we talked about earlier, like reporting that you aren't being paid the overtime that you are owed, and then you get fired for reporting it. Well, you'd probably have a claim. Another example would be if you are working on a construction site and your employer isn't following OSHA guidelines to keep the work site safe. And so you report it, and then you get terminated for some made-up reason. Well, you probably have a claim there too. Or another example would be if you worked in your company's accounting department and you noticed that the company was lying on its tax filings. So you tried to report it and then got fired for reporting it. Well, you'd have a claim there too. Now, these claims depend a lot on how you report the illegal activity. Sometimes you have to report the activity to an agency, and other times it's good enough just to report it to your employer. But it will depend. So as I keep saying, just make sure to talk to an employment lawyer if anything in this video sounds like it might have happened to you. Number 2 on my list is getting fired for taking protected leave. Now, there are a bunch of different kinds of protected leave, but the most common scenarios I see are when people take FMLA leave to take care of themselves or a sick family member, or if they take pregnancy leave to have a baby. Now, most states have their own versions of FMLA leave and pregnancy leave laws, but generally, if you take FMLA leave or your state-specific version of FMLA leave to care for yourself or a sick family member or to have a baby, your employer can't turn around and fire you for taking that protected leave. So say for instance that you take FMLA leave to take care of your sick child who had to stay in the hospital overnight. So you miss a day of work, and when you return, you're written up for attendance and fired for it shortly thereafter. Well, that's getting fired for taking protected leave, and you probably have a claim. Now, importantly, FMLA and its state-specific versions don't cover all workers and they don't cover all employers. So as I keep saying, just make sure to talk to an employment lawyer if it sounds like this may have happened to you. Now, my number one reason for you to sue your employer is if your employer fires you for making a complaint about discrimination or harassment based on your protected characteristic. These claims are called retaliation claims. And this is my number one claim because it happens a lot. And it's pretty easy to prove. See my video on how to prove retaliation to learn more about that. I'll put the link in the description and in the card at the top. But basically, workers who think they are being discriminated against or harassed because of their protected characteristic have a right to speak up about it. So if you speak up about it and then get fired for speaking up, that's illegal retaliation. Let's use an example. Let's say, for instance, that John is a black employee. And John notices that his managers treat him differently than his white coworkers, and they pay him less. And one manager even says some racially insensitive things about John. So John goes to HR and files a complaint that he feels that he's being discriminated against on the basis of his race. And then the company turns around and terminates John. Well, if they didn't have any good reason to terminate John, then it's more likely illegal retaliation for making a complaint of racial discrimination. Let's use another example. Let's say Jane is a worker who identifies as a woman. Her manager starts hitting on her and making her feel uncomfortable. So she goes and reports it to HR. Then HR tells the manager, who turns around and fires Jane. Well, Jane probably has a case of retaliation. Now, to have a retaliation claim, the conduct that you are reporting has to be based on your protected characteristic. Your protected characteristics are those things about yourself that you cannot change, like your race, your sex, your disability status, your country of origin, or age, just to name a few. But if the conduct that you are complaining about has nothing to do with your protected characteristics, you probably do not have a retaliation claim. As always, talk to a lawyer. So there you have it. Those are my top 5 reasons to sue your employer. If you think you were fired for an illegal reason and you live in Washington State, feel free to contact my firm. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and follow my channel. I make videos about the laws that protect workers. The more we hold employers accountable for their wrongdoing, the more we protect other workers. That's all for me this week. See you next time.